Excuse me, you have to be accredited press to get in here, so if you're not accredited press, and there's a process for doing that, so just check with my communications director on how to apply. So if you get that done, then you can come in.
Okay, so you have to be a corporate control. You can't operate with the press.
You have to get accredited through our credentialing process.
The first web doesn't say you need to be accredited. No, I want to talk to him right now. It's ridiculous. If you just answer my question, you're sitting there and said,
The First Amendment is for everybody, Governor. You're a tyrant. You're Ricketts. That's being tyrannical.
You guys can stand up here.
okay.
Yeah. And we have Scott somewhere?
Yep.
Oh, there it is. Great. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending our press briefing today. Today, we're going to talk about tax relief. And so I'm being joined by several folks here. Adam Kavan of Kavan Custom Construction, who is with me right here. Also, Scott Goebbels, who's Executive Director at Nelnet for Tax and Renewable Energy, as well as a familiar face, Brian Sloan, who is the President for the Nebraska State Chamber. And we're going to be talking about why it's so important to deliver tax relief in this legislative session. Now, let's take a step back. How are we able to do this in the first place? Well, one of the things I've talked about is that if we continue to control spending, so keep spending down low, below what our revenues are growing at, that's how you have sustainable tax relief. So I've now passed 4 budgets with the legislature. The average of those 4 budgets across 8 years is 2.5% growth in spending. If you look over a 20 or 30-year period, our average revenues grow anywhere between 4 to 5%, and I think the Legislative Fiscal Office pegs it at 4.75%. So, if you keep your spending low and your tax receipts are growing faster than that, that's how you can gradually take your rates down and deliver tax relief. Now, we've done that in a variety of ways. In 2020, we passed LB 1107, which is providing a refundable income tax credit to folks for property tax relief. So it's a rebate back basically on what you pay into your local school district and property taxes. You get a refundable income tax credit back from the state. Last year in 2020, when you filed your income taxes, you got a 6% rebate back essentially. This year, because the way LB 1107 is structured, you will get a over 25% credit back from the state on the taxes you pay into your local school district. So that is what you have going right now this year. That's roughly $548 million that the state is providing back to the citizens in property tax relief just in this one program. And so the first proposal I have is to make sure we make that permanent, because in 2024 that is scheduled to fall by nearly $200 million. And so we've got a proposal to get that one made permanent in LB 723. So that's the first one. Put a floor underneath that $548 million so that Nebraskans will always get that credit back on their taxes they pay into the local school district. So we can see that going forward past when LB 1107 would run out. The second thing we want to do is accelerate how we're doing our Social Security taxes. So we're one of the few states that actually taxes Social Security benefits. Last year we passed a bill to phase those taxes out over a period of 10 years. And so what I'm supporting is LB 823, or 825 rather, that would phase that out in over 5 years rather than 10 years. So we're basically accelerating that phase out of those taxes on Social Security. And that's important to make sure that we hold on to our seniors here in the state. We're one of the few states that's taxing Social Security benefits that provides an incentive for our seniors to leave and go to other states. We want our grandparents to stay here in Nebraska so that they can be with their families rather than going to a different state where they've got a better tax climate. So that's an important thing that we want to get done as well. And then finally, what we want to do is make sure that we're continuing to be competitive on income taxes, and that's LB 939. Now, last year, you may recall, we started moving our income tax rate down on businesses to get to a target of 7.25%. This year, what I want to do is really get to individuals and take our individual income tax rate down from 6.84 to 5.84 over a course of 5 years. Now, this is important because if we have money that is in excess of what we need to run state government, we should give it back to the people, because it's the people's money. It's not my money, it's not the legislature's money, it's not my agency's money, it's the people's money. And so we have money that is coming in above what we need to run our operations, we should return it back to the people. It's Nebraskans' hard-earned money, we should put it back in their pockets. And that's what we've seen here if you look over what's happened with regard to our forecast. You may recall that our revenues that for the fiscal year that ended June 30th of 2021, our revenues were nearly 20% above forecast. And for this biennium, when the forecasting board met in October, they took our forecast up by $900 million. And through November, December, it was up another $74 million on top of that. And then we just released the numbers today that show January was another $45 million up on that. So through the first 3 months since we've had that revised October forecast, we're already up another $119 million. So revenues are running above forecast. We have the ability to deliver tax relief. So that's one of the reasons we need to give that money back. The second is that this will help over 60% of Nebraska families, right? So over 60% of Nebraska families fall into this tax bracket. So providing those back to Nebraska families will help those families deal with, for example, what we know is going to be record inflation. Well, it's 40-year high inflation, right? So we just found that out last week as well. So returning more money back to Nebraska families will help them deal with some of the impacts we're seeing with regard to inflation, as well as, again, it's their money, we should give it back to them. What's also important from the standpoint of we want our families to stay here. We want to be competitive with other states. Right now, the only state around Nebraska that has a higher income tax rate is Iowa. And Governor Reynolds has proposed taking that rate down to 4%. So if we don't take action, we will be an outlier in, we have the potential to be an outlier in the region. And again, we don't want to create incentives for Nebraska families to leave. As you all know, we have a nation-leading and historical 1.7% unemployment rate. There's lots of great job opportunities here. But other states have low unemployment rates too. We need people to move to Nebraska. We don't want them moving to other states. So we have to be competitive on that individual income tax rate as one of the ways that we help hold on to Nebraska families. Now, as part of this overall proposal, what we want to do is take that tax on job creators, those businesses that are providing that, and bring that down to match the same rate so that we're having the same rate for our Nebraska families as well as those businesses that provide the jobs to those families. So that's also part of this overall proposal. And that, again, will help us be competitive from a standpoint of job creators, creating jobs in our state for Nebraska families. So this all goes together. And as I laid out in my budget proposal, we can make this all happen within the budget that I proposed to the legislature. So, kind of laid the whole background there for you with regard to where we are fiscally and what we want to accomplish here with these 3 bills. It's really important that we continue to make progress on all these, with LB 723 with regard to property taxes, LB 825 with regard to Social Security taxes, and then LB 939 with regard to income taxes. And so with that, now I'm going to turn over to Adam to talk a little bit more about what this means for him and his business. So, Adam, thank you. You're all.
Good morning, everyone. All right. My name is Adam Kavan. As the governor mentioned, I run Kavan Custom Construction here in town. We are a Nebraska-owned and operated corporation. Not one of the big boys by any means. Our gross sales are somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000, growing every year. 5 people on staff, so not the smallest, but definitely not the biggest. So, talk a little bit about myself here. My father was a farmer, a dairy farmer, and a small business owner here in Nebraska. He built houses all growing up. That's where I learned the trade. So I am technically the son of a 4th generation Nebraska farmer, 2nd generation builder. And small business is something that I am incredibly passionate about. Because business and family have always gone together. That's why I let myself get talked into public speaking today. It's a little outside my wheelhouse. So
You're doing great so far, Adam.
thank you. It's a little dry, but I'm here because I believe in what the governor's trying to do. So when my wife and I chose to start a family and eventually a business, it was clear that Nebraska was the place that we wanted to be. It was home. She grew up here. I grew up here. But Nebraska holds our traditional values. The cost of living is lower compared to a lot of our friends around the country. Home buying was more accessible to us, so this was a natural place to stay, aside from the taxes. Starting a small business was probably the most difficult journey of my life. It's been tough. We've sunk a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into our business. But despite all that, we're growing. You know, despite the challenges, we're increasing every year, taking on bigger and bigger projects. We have great aspirations for our company, as we want to teach our trade to the younger generation, the way my father and grandfather did. So, but as Governor Ricketts spoke to already, we're facing new challenges. Inflation, supply chain issues have hit us really hard. Skilled labor shortages as well, but that's something we can work with. This proposal won't fix every problem, but it's a big step in the right direction. It has the potential to change our lives. It would allow us to make some strategic investments in our own business, like hiring, developing our workforce. It'll give money back to Nebraska families, like my family, which I don't think is ever a bad choice. As I mentioned before, I'm a fifth-generation Nebraskan, and as far as I see it, Nebraskans are builders. We've built homes, churches, farms, communities. If you give businesses and families in this state the materials to build, we will continue to do just that. We'll continue to build Nebraska. So I want to say thank you to the Nebraska Chamber and to the Lincoln Independent Business Association for being constant business support to us. We rely on you guys quite a bit. And thank you, Mr. Governor, and to all the senators who are making this a priority. It's a big impact for us. So, thank you.
Good morning. As Nebraskans, we compete, we work hard.
So, Scott, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself again, please?
All right, sure. Good morning. I'm Scott Goebbels with Nelnet. I lead our corporate tax and renewable energy groups. As Nebraskans, I believe we compete, we work hard, we collaborate, and innovate. When faced with challenge, we adapt and overcome. We seek opportunities to create success. In order to compete and win, we need to revise the game plan from time to time, and now is that time. Nebraska has a unique opportunity to make a game-changing move by supporting tax modernizing policies. Like most companies, we at Nelnet continue to battle through the pandemic, supply chain challenges, impending interest rate increases, and extremely tight labor market. As the tax director at Nelnet, a company that pays tax all over the country, I continually analyze tax systems, rates, and structures. It's my job to advise our businesses, joint ventures, vendors, and startups where best to locate, invest, and attract talent and conduct business. Taxes are a meaningful cost of doing business and impact our strategic plan. Unfortunately, Nebraska's system is a bit outdated, expensive, and losing competitiveness. It falls short of equitable and growth-oriented results. At Nelnet, we're fortunate to call this great state of Nebraska our home. That being said, as we grow and diversify, we continually analyze the cost of doing business for our company and our associates. Taxes are an important component. Today, Nebraska is one of the most expensive tax states. This becomes an added challenge for attracting talent, investing in local startups, and integrating operations. But with challenge comes opportunity. Governor Ricketts' tax proposal includes modernization of our income tax system, a system that is more equitable and competitive. We should look at this as an investment that will produce returns for years to come. This is an investment in our businesses, our residents, schools, and communities. Our tax system should promote equity for all income levels and all business entity types. Our policies should attract employees during this time of massive mobility and work location flexibility. Decreasing tax rates can actually improve the funding for government services as we expand the tax base with more jobs, higher paying jobs, and greater innovation. Though we've tweaked our tax system from time to time over the past few decades, it's time to drive and support a systematic modernization. Therefore, it's the ideal time to reassess and change the game plan. Nebraskans compete, we want to win, and now is the time to reposition our tax system to do that. Let's modernize our regime to incentivize growth, investment, and residence within our great state. Thank you. I'll hand it over to Brian.
I'm Brian Sloan. I'm the president of the state chamber. And I just want to address a couple things because most of what needs to be said has been said. Is one, we're a very unique state in terms of our tax system. And this question of will a rate break only affect rich people? We tax people in this state at the very highest rate at a very low number. So for individuals, that will kick in at $31,000, essentially $31,000 of taxable income. And for married filing jointly, that'll kick in around $63,500 of taxable income. So if you have a two-earner family and you're making more than $63,500, you're suddenly in the top bracket. You're paying as much as anybody in this state in terms of a tax rate. And so when we talk about a tax rate cut in Nebraska, it's distributed pretty much across a large portion of the tax base, as the governor mentioned. In this case, we have approximately about 2/3 of our taxpayers make $250,000 or less jointly in this state, and a large portion of those are much lower. And so when this tax rate will affect teachers like my parents, it'll affect farmers with spouses who have jobs in town. It will affect young people coming to the state and taking jobs for the first time, because there's a lot of jobs that pay more than $31,000. And so this is not just a tax break for the rich, and I want to talk about that. And for those in the media, you hear me talk about this a lot, and so I'll finish with this question of what kind of competition is this state in right now, in a brand new environment. And I talk about this a lot. Is the world changed on us in the last 3 years? In the last 3 years, it became clear that you can live and work anywhere you want to. In one hand, it's the greatest opportunity Nebraska's had in my lifetime. We live in the state with the greatest quality of life in the world. We should be attracting young people and workforce like no other state. But let me tell you what the competition is up to. There are 8 states in this country which have no income tax at all, 2 which border our state. There are 3 states which have already enacted triggering mechanisms to try to get to zero income tax, which would make 11. There are 8 more states, including Iowa, where governors have announced an intent to dramatically lower rates. The trend right now to be competitive in state income tax rates is something that starts with a 5, and it will soon be something that starts with a 4. In a matter of years, an income tax rate that is above 4% will be very uncompetitive in attracting the very workforce we need. The economy of this decade, and I would argue the decade in the future for our communities from Omaha to Scottsbluff, small and large, is going to be dependent upon whether we can attract and retain 18 to 34-year-olds. And tax rates suddenly matter, and we can already see it in the migration patterns out of California and New York and into more Midwestern and Southern states. The data is there. And so this is a very important step, just getting us to something that starts with a 6 or not a 6 and not a 7, but a 5% point something tax rate begins to put us in a much more competitive environment at exactly and precisely the time that we need to make workforce attraction and people attraction and retention and bringing skilled folks, whether they be in the trades, whether they be in manufacturing, whether they be succession in ag, whether they be professionals, whether they be technology people. This is the key for our state. This is probably one of the most strategic pieces of legislation that we have this year in the legislature. It's really important, and it's a very high priority. So I want to thank the governor for his leadership. It makes all the difference in the world. It starts to pave the way for us to be what we should be. We should be one of the top 20 fastest growing states in population as this decade proceeds, and that has to be the goal because we know that's our economic future. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Brian, appreciate it. Thank you, Scott, and Adam as well for being here today, really appreciate it. Again, one of the things that we have the opportunities is to continue to make sure Nebraska is competitive, that we're continuing to attract people from across the country to come here. As these folks have talked about, it's so important that we remain competitive with the surrounding states so that we can do that. And these three tax bills will help us do that. They'll help provide property tax relief for our seniors through Social Security, income tax relief, and then finally for our income tax relief for both our individuals, our families, and our job creators here in the state. So with that, I'll go ahead and open it up, and as always, we'll take questions just on this topic, and then when we run out of this topic, if we have time left, we'll move on to other topics. Martha.
Governor, based on the preliminary budget that the Appropriations Committee has put out, this income tax proposal along with the Social Security proposal and the putting a floor on property tax credit program, those would not be affordable in the next biennium. Can you address that?
So actually, I think that if you go back and take a look at what we're proposing for our budgets, compared, and I actually, Martha, what we'll have to do is I'll have to get you with Lee Will to kind of lay this out, but I think the difference in what their initial budget proposal had was because of the way the Legislative Fiscal Office structures their projections into the next biennium, they have a model that assumes a 4.75% growth. Obviously, we have a higher growth in this biennium, so their model then forces that growth to be lower in the next 2 years. And if we used our projections based on econometric projections that actually show that while we expect slower growth, we're not expecting it to drop off as radically as what the Legislative Fiscal Models Office would require it to be to meet that 4-year or 5-year average of 4.75%. So we can get Lee Will with you in that. The long and short of it is, we believe that actually this is all affordable in the budget because we actually expect to see that that while we may see slower growth in the out years, we actually will still continue to see growth based upon the econometric forecast that we're getting from the people we pay to do that. Yeah.
Now, this assumes that you do not do anything to, you do not make permanent steps to improve provider rates, and a number of the providers in the state, those caring for people with developmental disabilities, behavioral health issues, elderly and disabled in nursing homes, they are saying they're in a pretty bad situation and need higher rates. How do you answer those folks?
So with regard to provider rates, I'd refer everybody back to the budget we passed last year where we did increase provider rates for many of the folks that you were talking about there, Martha. And also through this pandemic, providers have received a tremendous amount of support from the federal government as well. So if you go look at all the money, and we can get Lee Will, my budget guy, to go through this with you as well. There's been a tremendous amount of money that have gone to providers, both in the federal assistance, as well as the fact the state of Nebraska increased our provider rates. You may recall last year I proposed some rate increases. The Appropriations Committee took those rate increases and increased them even further, and that's the budget we passed. So we can certainly have Lee Will, my budget director, walk you through what the sum total of all those rate increases are. But the state of Nebraska continues to increase provider rates for the folks who are, we're working with.
Don't your provider rate increases run out though at the end of the fiscal year?
Well, so Paul's asking, don't some of my fiscal provider rates run out? What you're talking about is some of the additional provider rates where we have boosted provider rates as well. What we've asked is, we said, hey, show us this is going to work, right? So we increased the provider rates and said, if you can actually attract people in, we'll look at extending those even further, but we're asking the providers to actually show that the rate increases that we gave them is actually going to help them attract more people.
Do you think your budget would fit a provider rate increase as well as the cut in income tax?
Well, we're certainly willing to work with the legislature, but absolutely. We can make this all work together with regard to the budget, again, just by continuing to manage it like we've done over the last 8 years.
Governor,
I'm sorry, Martha, is there a question there?
Can you respond to that?
So your question is, the providers are facing inflationary pressures just like everybody else, and so they're asking for additional increases, and that's where I said, hey, to address Paul's question is, well, we've given in key areas, like we've done for the state, when you've got 24-hour facilities, for example, we've given increases, and we asked if they can show that that's working, we can make that work within the budget as well.
Seems like one of the conversations I hear is that the brackets are too low in Nebraska. I mean, the top rate kicks in at $63,000. Why not fix that instead of the rate?
So Paul's question is, why not fix the brackets with regard to, as opposed to adjusting the rate? And certainly that is another way to approach looking at our taxes. The way that we chose was a very simple way to do it, was just start taking our rates down to be more competitive from that standpoint. And again, it makes it easy for people to understand, hey, this is what your income tax rate is going to be. As we said, it's going to impact over 60% of Nebraska families, so we're having a big impact on Nebraska families with regard to this. It's going to impact folks like Adam and Scott who hire people or advise companies where they're going to expand. And so this is something that's going to help us make us more competitive.
So it's a simpler approach?
I believe this is a simpler approach.
Isn't it less costly too?
And Paul's question is it a less costly approach? And you'd have to show me the plan, Paul. I don't know exactly what you're talking about, so. Yeah, it depends on what you do, Paul.
What do you say to your rural senators who, their top priority is property tax relief? Why should they jump onto a plan that cuts income tax?
So Paul's asking, what about rural senators, and what would you say to them when they say, hey, our top priority is property tax relief? And I would say, first of all, we are continuing to work on property tax by putting a floor underneath that $548 million to make sure in 2024 that doesn't drop by nearly $200 million. So we are continuing to work on property tax relief. And also, lots of farmers and ranchers, they're in these income tax brackets as well, so they're gonna get benefit from either the family rate we just talked about, or when we're talking about if they've got their businesses set up in a way that they would be paying, the business tax, they'd be benefiting from that as well.
First, I think they're gonna say that there's more work to be done on property taxes. If we have a bad year, we aren't paying income tax. It's not much of an issue. Would you respond to that? Is there more to be done on property tax, or do you think?
So Paul's question is there more to be done on property tax? And the answer is yes, absolutely. We want to continue to work on property taxes. We're doing that this year with our Bill 723.
But Governor, won't the value, if you lock in $548 million in steps, won't the value of that diminish over time?
So Fred's asking, won't the value of that $548 million decrease over time if you lock it in at that? And my recollection is in 723, there's actually there's a growth rate thing in there, so it would go up a couple % a year or whatever as well. So I think that's actually part of the bill. Yeah, Martha.
I'd like to hear from Adam and Scott about which parts of the income tax proposal would be helpful to them.
Sure,
Is it
absolutely.
the corporate part, is it the individual income part?
Adam, I'll start with you.
Sure. I wasn't prepared to take any questions, but I think both of them. I mean, we're in a tight enough market that any sort of relief we get would be massive to us. We've already faced quite a few challenges.
Structured as a corporation?
We are, yes.
Yeah, I'd say both are equally important. At Nelnet, we hire a very diverse skill set and very diverse income levels, from customer contact to tech and leadership. So the individual income tax rate is very important, as is the corporate. Back when I was in public practice, it didn't seem right to have an unequitable structure motivating one entity type over another. So I think it is important. The other thing I would say in regards to...
Scott, could you expand upon that a little bit? Sure. Between the taxes for corporations versus the taxes for individuals, and how that might work with an LLC and that kind of thing?
Sure. Yeah, so there's several different corporate forms. One is the C corporation, and that entity pays tax itself on its earnings. and then it would distribute cash out to the shareholders, and they would pay tax at their individual rate as well, versus the very common entity structure today is an S corp or an LLC or a sole proprietorship. And that income flows through directly to the shareholders, and they pay tax at their individual rate. So you can see in the C corporation, you have double taxation, which the feds addressed here a couple years ago. I think we're proposing to do the same here. The other thing I would say in regards to the rate versus a bracket, you know, if you're a practitioner or even an employee that's looking to determine where to locate your business or grow, most people don't dig into all the finite details, right? They're looking at the rate, and they see a very expensive high rate, and that may persuade them to locate somewhere else.
So Nelnet is what, S corp?
We are Nelnet's a C corporation, so we pay tax at the corporate level, and then our shareholders would pay tax on dividends.
Have you ever had anybody turn down a job at Nelnet because of the income tax rate?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Scott, will you repeat the questions too, please?
Sure.
I forgot to do that before.
Sure. Yes, so the question was, have we ever had someone turn down a job because of our income tax rate? I would say we have had employees that we've wanted to relocate to Nebraska from elsewhere in the country, and that is a point of hesitation or resistance because they see that tax rate. They may be coming from a zero tax state or a less expensive state. I've also worked with some startups that they're a tech company. They can locate anywhere. And when we try to sell them on Nebraska and some of the benefits, that is, again, another point of hesitation or resistance.
Now, isn't it correct that corporations in Nebraska pay income tax only on their sales in Nebraska? So it's not as if you're gonna lure somebody here with a lower corporate tax, because that wouldn't affect that.
Yes.
And repeat the question.
Yes. So the question was, do corporations, how do they source their, how do they determine the amount of income they're going to pay in Nebraska? And you're right. Actually, I was part of the bill about 10 years ago where we made a fix, and previously our system was that once you had more cost, so people and investment in Nebraska than any other country, you paid tax 100% of that here, plus everywhere else you had a presence and activity. We got that fixed, so yes, now a corporation would pay tax based on the sales from Nebraska customers, which was a significant change and a modernization, and nearly the entire country is now sourcing that way. But now we need to come back and clean up and make sure that our rate is competitive as well.
It's got bottom line. If Nebraska doesn't do something, would Nelnet think about relocating or not expanding?
Yeah, so the question is, with absent a reduction in the corporate rate, would Nelnet relocate? I would say in 2012, when our system was fairly outdated and non-competitive, where we would pay tax on nearly 200% of our income, we were highly motivated to start look at other alternatives. That system, that fix was critical in Nelnet's growth. We've now considered Nelnet in Nebraska our home, but it is a important factor in the overall cost of our business, and primarily trying to attract talent.
Actually, let's give, Brian, you deal with a lot of companies.
Yeah,
You wanna
yeah,
address that
yeah.
as well?
So yeah, it absolutely affects companies' interest in investing and building in Nebraska. So we have first of all, we have lots of companies that only sell their goods in Nebraska. And I suspect you're one. And so when we think of corporate tax, we're always thinking about, companies that sell hard goods all over. But the truth is that we have lots of companies that only sell in Nebraska in the first place, and that small and mid-sized business is a huge part of our economy. Lots of manufacturers who manufacture for other manufacturers here and provide the supply chain in Nebraska. In fact, that's one of the core things we're trying to achieve, is to create more supply chain right here in Nebraska, serving other Nebraska companies. The decisions that companies make on when they're going to build a new production line, or they're gonna build a new technology, or they're gonna create some new software. And where they're gonna locate that has a lot to do with effective tax rates. And it's not shocking that all the technology companies rushed to Austin 10 years ago with a 0% tax rate. We don't have to be zero, but we have to stay competitive. And right now, the trend line in a very large number of states is to go much, much lower than we're even talking about in this bill. We've got to start this process to stay competitive. We've got to continue to play. For all of us, you know, one of our good friends always says, we all wear the same jersey. For all of us, whether we want to fund education or we want to fund property tax relief, or, you know, someday when I am in that retirement facility in Scottsbluff, which seems sooner and sooner and sooner every day, we need economic growth. We need to attract young people to keep our economies and our communities going here. This is fundamental to all of our futures, from wherever we come from.
Thank you, Brian. All right, other questions on the tax proposals, tax relief proposals? All right, seeing none, I'll thank our guests. Thank you all very much for being here. Scott, Adam, Brian, appreciate all your help on this. And good luck on the new business there, Adam, or growing the small business. That's great. Great. And again, we really appreciate all of Nelnet's contributions to this, the state of Nebraska.